Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
It's not necessarily about what we're doing. It's about how we're doing it and why we're doing it. I think a lot of times it's going to dictate whether or not it's a healthy lifestyle or it's really more of a diet masked as a lifestyle change.
You're listening to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a productivity coach certified in positive psychology and stress management. Join me as we explore ways to live a more proactive, positive life with episodes on productivity, self-awareness, mindset, entrepreneur life, habits and systems, simplicity, fun, and more. I understand overwhelm personally as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and as a caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and in today's episode, we're revisiting a topic that hits close to home for me, and I wonder if it does for you too. Dieting. It's a huge industry, like $72 billion huge, yet 95% of diets don't work. They're based on fear, guilt, shame, sometimes the guise of a healthy lifestyle. Yep, with the air quotes there, but not sustainable, and that makes calling it a lifestyle even more problematic. Here to help us understand why this kind of dieting doesn't work is Alisha Carlson, a non-diet lifestyle coach for women. Everything she shares today is from lived experience. Even with her degree in exercise science and extensive knowledge of nutrition, she fell down the diet rabbit hole too and had to climb her way back out. She shares her perspective as a past dieter and coach, and I share my experiences as well in this conversation. What we talk about today is complemented in two other episodes, episode 25 on intuitive eating and episode 28 on a non-diet way to lose weight by giving yourself more. I've linked to those in the show notes and encourage you to listen to them as well if this topic resonates with you. Alisha shares 7 aspects of dieting that cause problems for us, and most importantly, she gives us those first steps we can take when we're ready to approach things differently. There are so many parallels throughout our conversation to diet culture and hustle culture and to healthy living and purposeful productivity. I hope this conversation encourages you to live well and from a place of love. Let's join Alisha now. Alisha Carlson, welcome to the Positively Living podcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me.
Before we dig into the 7 reasons diets fail and what to do about it, I'd love it if you'd share a bit about you and what makes you light up.
I guess a little bit about me. I live in Oregon. I think we kind of discovered that we might be similar along the latitudinal lines, just because we're both in great wine country. I've got 2 kids. I've been married to my husband for about 17 years now, which is crazy to think about. So in terms of things that light me up, I mean, obviously I love hanging out with my family and spending time doing that. I am also very blessed and fortunate that I get to do work that I love and that I'm super passionate about as well. So some of what we're going to be talking about today is definitely along the lines of something that I could talk ad nauseum about. And so I'm very excited about that. I love working with my clients, seeing the breakthroughs. I think one of the biggest things that really fuels me is seeing those aha moments or those light bulb moments with the women and the men that I work with when they have this realization that, you know, maybe the way that they've been approaching food or the way that they have been doing food all of this time and the weight loss and all of that, that there really is and can be another way to go about that is a lot more fulfilling, I think, overall. And so I'm passionate about that. I'm very much invested in my faith. And so I also like to have some pretty deep conversations around that as well. And I like to meet new people and hear their stories. I always believe that we have something in common with everybody. We just have to talk to them long enough to figure that out. So for me, it's just as cool to hear about people's lives and to figure out what makes them tick. And so I think that's probably why I really like coaching.
Yeah, coaching. And I know for me, podcasting also brings that to me as well. And I do too believe that we have so much in common. And I think today's topic, especially so. So you came to do this. And I think many of us coaches, I feel the same way about productivity, came to it after conquering our own battles, right?
Yes, 100%.
All right. So before we dig into why diets are an issue, let's make sure that we're on the same page about like what a diet actually is. And then maybe you can also share what your experiences have been as well.
When I think of the word diet, I actually view it either as a noun or a verb. Typically, when people are thinking of diets, they are going on a diet, right? A lot of times it's something that we do sort of short term, or we think maybe we're going to turn it into a lifestyle, but really the way that we are approaching it keeps it from being something that we really could do sustainably over time. Whereas if somebody is choosing like a vegetarian lifestyle or a vegan lifestyle, or, potentially there are health benefits for certain populations with other types of diets, like keto, I know is great for people with epilepsy and things like that. That is more of like a lifestyle choice that somebody is making for usually a reason that's kind of deep and important to them. Whereas I think a lot of times, at least this was where I fell into the trap of dieting, but yet calling it a lifestyle, is that, and this was, this is really what we're going to get into. It was fueled by a lot of fear around food, a lot of restriction, largely driven, not even necessarily by my health, but predominantly what my body looked like. It's just important to just kind of check in with yourself and see, am I approaching this trying to make this like a long-term lifestyle, or is this something that is fueled by a lot of deprivation, restriction, and fear around food?
I find that description rather refreshing, like a really good balance to me, because I have definitely lived the restrictive lifestyle, the wanting to, quote, lose weight and wanting my body to look differently and having issues with how I look, wanting, and the idea of wanting to be healthier. And I just feel like we conflate so much of this and it all gets mixed up and jumbled. But that real key part in there about it being fear-based and restriction-based, as opposed to, and you say it in I've listened to your audiobook, your audio version of your book, you say it needs to come from self-love. And I think Georgie Fear has done a beautiful job of that. She was on the podcast talking about giving yourself more. So coming from a good place. But what I really like is that the way you're describing this, showing so much respect for different kinds of diets, noun-based, right? That are certainly an option and was going to be, you've already sort of almost answered a question that I had for you, which is that sometimes we have reasons why we want to eat a particular way. It can be personal, it can be spiritual, it can also be because we have other, medical concerns where we think eating in a particular way may be beneficial to us. But again, I guess it comes down to the intent. So when we're saying reasons diets fail, we're talking about that restricted, maybe short-term approach, fear-based type that's not the lifestyle type, but rather intending to make a change for what reason? I mean, I guess sometimes we call it vanity, but for so many reasons, there can be something deep inside us that desires that change. I don't want to discount that that's important to us, but my understanding is that you're saying when we do that in this way, it's going to cause more harm than good.
Yes. And I think you really captured a lot of it, is that it really comes down to the intention. And that was the pivotal moment for me, standing in my kitchen, taking before pictures again. At this point, I had my degree in exercise science. I've studied nutrition for over almost a decade. I had gone from being a couch potato to running 5Ks, half marathons, stepping on stage as a fitness competitor, and feeling like such a failure. Like, why am I starting over again? Why is it that this always just feels so hard? If this is a healthy lifestyle, why does it always feel like I'm fighting with my body and struggling? And for me, with my faith, like that was the moment that I heard that small voice tell me, it's because you've been dieting this whole time and calling it a lifestyle. And that was really the thing that stopped me in my tracks and had me just kind of step back for a minute and think about that. And that was kind of the catalyst, like I said, that had me exploring, health at every size, intuitive eating, I think were some of the first two resources that I had looked into as I'm kind of navigating. I think up to that point, I didn't even know the word diet culture or even like the anti-diet movement. It was like all of that stuff was just this new world for me. And so there's been a lot of learning, a lot of maybe unlearning, relearning, and I think just a lot of trying to navigate it for myself as well in terms of what is a philosophy that I really feel like I can stand by and that is something that's going to be adding and be beneficial to the world and to my clients. It's not necessarily about what we're doing. It's about how we're doing it and why we're doing it. I think a lot of times it's going to dictate whether or not it's a healthy lifestyle or it's really more of a diet masked as a lifestyle change.
That's such an important distinction. And I really feel that way about productivity. And so there's to me, a similar, like a parallel here, where we talk about being productive and it's the hustle culture to me and the diet culture have a lot in common, where it's on principle that it seems to be this push without the intentionality, without the mindfulness that allows us to say, oh, wait, this is right, or this is not, or this is too much, or this is beyond my limit, or this is okay. We're not checking in enough. So I think that's such an important distinction. So along the lines of intuitive eating, I've been a fan of that for a long time, and that book made a huge difference to me. I have mentioned on the show before, and we had Megan Hadley join us and talk about healthy at every size and intuitive eating. And I had essentially deemed myself, I didn't have it, I wasn't professionally diagnosed, but I felt myself in the realm of what's called orthorexic, where I felt like there was just nothing that I could eat that would be okay. And to this day, I can feel that I can tell you, like, essentially, quote, what's wrong with every bit of food that I consume, and realizing that I didn't want to live that way. It sucks the joy out of life. It's also so energy draining. And this may be part of the 7 reasons that you have. So I think we should dig into that next. But having to live your life where that's what you're constantly focused on, counting calories and feeling like you've, and judging yourself, where's the joy in that? So yeah, let's dig into that type of dieting that we're talking about, that restrictive fear-based dieting. And you had me at hello, but but you had me at 7 reasons. So I would love it if you would take us through those reasons why, despite the fact that it feels like they work, they really don't.
Through discovering just within myself, I think kind of backtracking and just being like, okay, what was it that really didn't work about the way that I was approaching things in the past? And we've already definitely touched on a few of them, but one of them is the restriction aspect, right? So typically we know that if something is restricted or if it's seen as being off limits, a lot of times that actually drives our desire for that thing even more. And so one of the first things that I did as I'm like, okay, this obviously is not working. We need to figure out a new way to interact with food. And I can connect with you in that orthorexia. I wasn't diagnosed. It might now be a diagnosable eating disorder, but for a long time, it wasn't even in the DSM. But for me, that started with clean eating and the clean eating diet. While I will say, do I agree with, trying to eat as closely to nature as we can? A good percentage of the time, like, yes, absolutely. And that for me was really where I saw this thing kind of start to spiral and trigger, especially as a mom of 2 kids. I'm like oh my gosh, I don't want to make them sick. I don't want to be the reason that they're unhealthy as adults. I don't want to be unhealthy. And so that just created a lot of guilt and shame and anxiety, truthfully. That's where I really noticed the restrictions kind of coming up, where it's like, okay, we can't eat anything that's processed, or, we can't have any of this stuff. We have to always be trying to make everything else, healthy, like healthy cookies, healthy brownies. And again, like everybody has the right to choose that. And let's just explore maybe like what's going on that's kind of driving those decisions. But so really it's that restriction. And I would say like there's restriction and then there's also deprivation, which I wouldn't necessarily categorize the same. I think a lot of times that deprivation is more that emotional place, whereas restrictions can definitely be more like mental or physical restrictions. And then, just that deprivation is just that feeling of, oh my gosh, I can't have that. I really want that and I can't have that. And so for me, one of the things that really worked was to remove those food rules, remove some of the restriction, not really have any off-limit foods anymore, but allow myself to eat some of the things that I had been craving. Because the reality is that the more I restricted, the more that I felt deprived around certain foods, that's when I found myself kind of teeter-tottering or yo-yoing back and forth of being good, quote unquote good throughout the week. And then by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm feeling completely drained, completely wiped out because I was relying on willpower, which is another reason I would say that diets don't work. And then I would find myself just kind of on the other end and binging on all of the things that I had been restricting and then restarting that cycle over and over.
With deprivation, that emotional side of like, I can't have this. And then there's a continued spiral with the guilt and the shame, and then I can't have it. And I've always thought it was interesting with intuitive eating that we're relearning essentially something that we did have at one point, and it was pushed out of us or taught. We were taught otherwise, that we can't trust our bodies, that we can't have these things, whatever based on restriction for whatever reason. I do think diet culture was a big part of that, and it may have been with the best of intentions. Mm-hmm. But the biggest fear I always hear is I'm going to face plant in a bag of Oreos. And it's like, well, maybe to begin with, but you use the description in your book about like the rubber band pulling. Mm-hmm. And so when you pull a rubber band back, it is going to snap pretty hard at first. That's only initially. And then willpower. This is so important because we know, again, on the lines of productivity, that we need to have something that's habit-based, and that connects to what you're calling lifestyle. When we're just trying to hold out, I mean, you can. And if you're determined, you can. But how sustainable is it?
For most of us, if we've ever attempted anything using willpower alone and not really working from the inside out on implementing habit change, behavior change, and even a lot of the psychological tools that we have access to now, right? So that rewiring your brain and your thinking, the percentage changes depending on who you're talking to. So I usually say about 85 to 90% of our daily decisions and behaviors are driven by the subconscious. And also, I think just kind of that very basic, like human drive of wanting to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and make things as easy as possible. And so when we're not really like tapping into what makes us tick as human beings, and we're just trying to like white knuckle it and willpower our way through something, the chemicals that willpower is, like that cascade of chemicals in our body, really only has about a 24-hour shelf life. And so this is where that decision fatigue can come into play. If it feels like you've been kind of fighting with yourself all day long around food, or even if you've been in your head a lot around, what am I going to eat? Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just ate that. Or all of those thoughts, that depletes that willpower. And so this is a lot of times where by the end of the day, you're so exhausted, you're so wiped out. And it's so much easier and more appealing to sit on the couch with a bag of chips because the willpower is gone. Yeah, I would say willpower is definitely something that we want to look at. Are we just trying to like do it and be good, or are we slowing down and taking the time to make the change from the inside out?
Okay, that was number 3. What's next?
The next one I would say is that disconnection to the body. this can be when we're only trying to eat by the numbers, whether that's macros or points or calories, and we're not really tuning into our body's internal cues of hunger and fullness, even satiation and satisfaction. A lot of times we're just disconnected, or it's like, okay, you can only eat between these hours, or you have to eat every 1.5 to 2 hours, or now you're supposed to only eat every 4 to 5 hours so that your insulin can come down, right? That all just kind of disconnects us from what the body is trying to signal. And one of the things that I really appreciated in reading The Intuitive Eating is that hunger is not something that we need to fear. It's not something that we need to be afraid of. It really is just like any other physical sensation that we have in our body where, okay, my bladder is full, I have to go pee. Like, we don't make that a big deal, or we don't make that something wrong. But when we feel hungry, it's either an emergency and we have to hurry up and not feel hungry anymore, or we are doing all of these crazy things to try to curb our appetite, ultimately so that we're eating less, ultimately so that we're losing weight. And so I really think, that's one of the biggest factors, is just not being connected to your body anymore.
I feel like when that happens and then when you've been so restrictive, then that hunger means so much more than it needs to. Because then you're like, oh my gosh, when am I going to have a chance to eat again? Versus in intuitive eating, you can be like, I can eat anytime I want. Let's play this out. Let's see how it feels. I did learn something that I absolutely love, and it's something that I've taught my children, which is, a meal is that much better when you're good and hungry. Allow yourself to sit with that a little bit, but it's so much easier to do that when you can trust that you will be able to take care of the hunger. I think that disconnect comes along with like almost a desperation that makes it very difficult to be able to sit with that.
Yes. And I think too, like when we are so disconnected to our bodies, we can easily miss some health things that are happening, right? Like I was just kind of rereading some sections in a book, and I appreciated the way that he talked about this. He's coming from a functional medicine perspective, but when you get the diagnosis of hypertension, let's say, it didn't really just happen like blood pressure is here and now blood pressure is here. It's been this thing that's been kind of like building up over a while. Same with diabetes, right?
Yeah.
And so when we're disconnected from our bodies and we're just focused on getting a certain calorie count or a certain macro count, or we're so hyper focused on the number of the scale, we might miss other signals that our body is sending that something is out of whack.
Yeah.
And that was something, and this will kind of go into that next point, but that was something for me. It was like, I didn't have a period for years. I mean, I don't think I realized even to the extent that I had kind of gone through and damaged. And I don't know if damaged is the right word or the best word, but where I had really kind of harmed my body because I was exercising very intensely, focusing on that calorie burn, and then also being too restrictive with the calorie content. That was kind of that next point.
To that point about the internal cues, I was thinking of I guess I'll call them the standard. I don't know if that's not the right word, but yes, I wanted to say like standard issue. We go through changes constantly. I feel like we're trying to put this under the guise of consistency, if you will, in this diet, like to place this structure on ourselves in a body that is not going to comply to that. Each and every day, we have different energy levels, different experiences. We've slept differently. We have different levels of rest. And I was also thinking for women, you have a cycle of hormones that's going to change how you show up, and it's going to change your satiety levels. It's going to change your cravings, and being able to go with that flow as opposed to saying, no, we're doing this many calories. We start to ignore the body going, yeah, about that. I disagree. And then we're like, tough, you don't. And then eventually, if it's like, no, I really disagree to the point that now we have an issue, you're not going to hear that.
That goes along with another point or another reason why I think diets tend to fail is that rigidity. So there isn't flexibility usually within diets. It depends. I mean, if you read certain diet books, it's like you can never have gluten again, or you can never eat dairy again, or you have to cut out sugar indefinitely. And again, I think we can get into the nuanced reasons why somebody might choose to give up gluten or dairy or be more mindful of their sugar intake. But again, that comes back to, what's the reason that you're doing it? Is it the fear-based? Is it, the guilt or the shame? That's not really going to produce results long term. And in fact, until you really deal with what is causing the guilt and the shame and, just that deeper longing for something, like, it's not going to be resolved by a diet. It's not going to be resolved by losing weight. And so to that point, especially as women, our bodies are changing throughout the month. If you're still cycling, if you're going through menopause, or you're in that sort of perimenopause stage, your body's changing again. If you're pregnant, your body's needs are going to be different. And a lot of times just the diets do not allow for that need for flexibility. We even know that stress and sleep and hydration, all of these things can play a part. It's incredible how many different chemicals are involved in just these, what seem like very small processes. And if one thing is slightly off, it can trigger the hormones. Being able to be a little bit more flexible with your eating, with your working out, and being able to shift things based on how you slept or the amount of stress you're experiencing overall, or just where you're at in this season of life, is incredibly helpful if you're wanting to make long-term lasting lifestyle changes.
Yeah, I mean, one lousy night of sleep, and it's proven that you will crave carbohydrates more the next day. There's a cause and effect here, and it's going to change on the daily, and being able to move with that is going to be so much better.
Another point is, oftentimes I think the caloric needs that we actually have are not being met when we're following these super low diets. There's so many different arguments out there of calories in, calories out. I think that that's a little bit simplified when we're looking at the body. Not to mention the fact that nutrition labels are not incredibly accurate. We tend to not be very accurate in our reporting as well. And so there's a lot of margin for error. But what ends up happening is that people, I do believe, are earnestly, for the most part, doing their best in trying to track those different things. And yet they're not getting the result that they think that they should. And instead of it being this data thing, it becomes more about them. And there's that emotional tie to it. And so I think a lot of times, if we're following a diet, especially if we're being super rigid, super strict, and we're exercising a ton, we're probably not getting the amount of nutrients and nutrition that our body actually needs. And again, if we're not connected to our body, we're not going to be able to discern some of those signals, right?
Yeah.
Hair loss is a major thing. If there's disturbances to sleep, that's another issue. If you feel like your hunger is jacked up all the time, that can be another signal that something's going on. If cravings are through the roof, if your energy dips, right? So there's all these things that your body's constantly telling you. But if we're disconnected, if we're like stuck to the plan and we're being super rigid, we're going to miss some of that. And so what we see happen a lot of times with the diet is that somebody can do this sort of eat less, exercise more for a few weeks, but then their body, like they notice, like the cravings are driven up, their hunger is driven up, the willpower has certainly run out. And so now their body is like, if it's not getting adequate nutrition, it's going to drive you to eat, because your body is worried about survival. It's not really worried about what size pants are you wearing, what's the number on the scale, which that's a whole nother conversation, and that there is not necessarily an ideal body weight for you. BMI is a pretty bogus thing. So are a lot of these weight charts. People can be healthy at a variety of shapes and sizes. So yeah, if you're not getting enough nutrition, if you're not getting enough of different kinds of nutrition, your body is going to essentially kind of start to rebel, because it's looking at homeostasis and staying alive and, maintaining basic healthy functions. So we need to make sure we're at least eating enough for that.
Yeah. And when you have this constantly drilled into you that you need to be in a calorie deficit and your body doesn't want that. And again, it's fine if you have a fluctuation and some days you may not eat as much, just naturally living your life. But when you're pushing it beyond and your body's telling you otherwise, that's not only diet's not working, that's cause for concern over the long haul.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, this is the last reason, but potentially it's the most important one. And it's been sort of a thread that's been woven throughout is really looking at why you would want to start a diet or why you would want to pursue the weight loss in and of itself. A lot of times, at least I know for myself, and I didn't know this, I didn't realize this while I was in the midst of it. This was something that came when I was sort of on the other side and had started doing some of that healing work around food, around my body, and just coming to a place of being more accepting that maybe my healthy body isn't going to be the shape or the size that I thought it should be, or that society has told me that it should be. You know, this last reason is just looking at the reasons that you are driven to that. For me, it was, I thought my life would be perfect. And I know that sounds crazy, but I thought that all of my life's problems kind of hinged on what my body looked like or my weight. And it was like, well, if I was just smaller, you know, I had this magic thinking that my marriage would probably be better and I would be a better mom and I would be more successful. And what I really discovered is that almost the more weight that I lost, because I was already starting from an insecure place and not feeling comfortable and not feeling confident in my body, that was only magnified the more weight that I lost. My insecurity just rose. I was still comparing myself to other women, just on a grander scale. And so I think that a lot of times when we are starting diets, and when they're marketed out there, there's no conversation around, let's explore, like, why do you want to lose the weight in the first place? What's going on for you?
It's the mindset. And I wanted to be careful about saying doing something for the wrong reasons because you know what? Presumably you're an adult listening to this. You get to choose why you want to do what you want to do. But the idea that, and the way that I've written it in my notes because this is how I see it when you say it, is thinking that this diet based on fixing your body size is going to be a fix to your life. It's like this sort of misunderstood, this mindset that it's going to be a fix. And you know, we see this problem across all manner of life where it's like, it's the sort of the if-then statement, right? If I do this, then I will be happy and I'll be satisfied. And if I get this, then I will be content. And it's like we come to understand that really it has to start within and start with us. And that's, I guess, part of the answer to the next ultimate question as we wrap up today, which is those are the reasons why it doesn't. And I think in each of those, there's an element of, okay, we kind of know what we can do instead. But really, what would you say are the steps we can take next if we're like, yeah, okay, I'm caught up in this. How do I step out and step in the right direction? Because I still want to be healthy. Maybe I have issues. Maybe I still believe that my body is holding on to excess weight. You know, whatever the reasons are, what can we do next that is going to be better for us than this diet approach, Alisha?
I mean, I think a couple of good places to start is one, just doing some searching. You know, what is it that I think is going to be waiting for me on the other side of this? If I lost the weight, if I dropped the pant sizes, and believe me, like, there is no judgment. We're adults. We get to decide if we want to change how our body looks or whatever. And I'm all for that. Like, as a coach, my job is to help you in your pursuit of your goals. But I think also part of that is, let's understand why this is important to you. Once you uncover that, you get to decide, like, is that still really a reason that you want to go after the goal or not? So I think that's a great place to start, is like, okay, here's the goal. Here's what I'm working on. Why do I want that? Why is that important? What do I think would change about my life if I reach this? And is that actually true?
Coming back to productivity, such parallels here. When you understand your why, that will drive you forward to find the right habits and the right way to do things for you such that you can achieve those goals. But I think reflection here is incredibly important, maybe even more so because you're talking about a complex human system that we sometimes oversimplify with the diet idea, and really making sure that, I guess, your reasons are the right reasons. And
For
I guess that
you,
could be
right?
for you.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. That's such an important distinction, that it's the right reasons, but again, the right reasons for you, because that's what's sustainable.
And, it's really asking, like, do I like my reasons for pursuing this? And then I think, too, if you are looking at making lifestyle changes or starting a diet or tinkering around with something like that, it's just honestly answering, like, could I see myself doing this forever? Is this something that I'm willing to make these changes forever for the long term? And if the answer is no, then we kind of have to understand that any results you create while doing that are only going to live as long as you're working the plan. And I think that's something that sometimes we miss. And, that brings us to another small point, is that we could follow the same diet and the same workout program and get different results. So I think, too, kind of taking that with a grain of salt as well. So I think just spending some time in reflection is a great place to start. Finding some resources, whether that's free. I certainly have a podcast that goes into a lot of this stuff more in depth. Really working on my relationship to food, to exercise, but also with myself was huge. And I would say that that probably has had the most profound impact, and not just in this area, but really every other area of my life as well.
That's a good one. Okay, so reflecting and relationship, I think I think those are really the two big ones right now to step away. And yeah, I agree that our relationship with food and exercise, I jokingly say, I don't like to use the E word, I'll use movement, but you know what? You grab the thesaurus and do whatever works for you. It's all good. But again, coming from a place of love, because you have to start with relationship to self. What is self-care to you? And it's taken me a while to understand that sometimes the quote exercise that I jokingly say, I only run when I'm chased or whatever, but that movement is in fact self-care. And even if I think at first I don't like it, because anytime we go to do any kind of task, there's that inertia, right? That, getting to it. My son has a great line. He's like, you may not like it when you're exercising, but you'll love it when you're done, And of course, I'm always looking for stuff that feels sustainable because it is fun. It is more enjoyable. But at some point, you're going to be making an effort, maybe. And it might be an effort to eat foods that make you feel better. That's something I've focused on for a while. So I like that, reflecting and asking, do I like my reasons why I want to do this? And then researching and working on your relationship, not only with food and exercise, but with yourself first and foremost. That's beautiful. All right. I think with that, we are ready for a rapid wrap up, but I will make sure we'll have your links, your podcast in the show notes so that everyone can hop over and get your resources. And you have a great app as well, which I've downloaded. And that's where I listened to your audiobook, and that was a great resource.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much. Have all those links ready for people that maybe are like, yeah, I want to still live a healthy lifestyle. I want to take care of myself, but I'm tired of beating myself up all the time.
Right. And do you have a main website that you can probably access most of the stuff from?
Yes, AlishaCarlson.com.
And that will be in the show notes.
Yep.
Okay, it's rapid wrap-up time. So essentially, we want a song, a saying, and a resource that are things that inspire positively living for you. So a song, a saying, and a resource.
The saying that's just coming to my mind is to just take life one day at a time. Don't worry too much about tomorrow, and don't live in the past beating yourself up over what you did. A song, oh my gosh, that inspires positive living. I'm trying to think of one that I have really been enjoying lately. Her name is Remy Wolf, I think. And it was like a song that was just randomly on a playlist in one of my classes. She has two that I like. It's Disco Man and then a resource. I live in my podcast app for sure. I like to listen to a different variety of things. I think if I were going to give just kind of an overall resource, something that was really instrumental in a lot of the thought work that I have done is the Life Coach School podcast. So with Brooke Castillo,
Yep.
that's been a good podcast that I've listened to.
Okay. And then one more bonus question. This is last but definitely not least. What are you grateful for today, Alisha?
I am very grateful for the sunshine. We live in a fairly rainy part of the state. And so I'm very thankful that we have blue skies today. I think we're trending towards the 70s, at least through the weekend. So I am eternally grateful for that.
We here in New York definitely feel you on that. Well, I am so grateful for you and that you joined us today to share your wisdom and to shine your light so brightly in this world.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for creating this space and for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.